Team, welcome to the QA manual testing session 3. As I was just iterating a few minutes back. So we had one orientation session followed by day 1 and day 2 in the last week. Majorly, we were discussing about what are the things that are required for somebody to be perfect in manual testing before we actually jump onto automation testing, or you may be parallelly learning automation testing. So kind of understanding a couple of these topics. Let me just quickly. So you need to understand the software development lifecycle. Before that, I kind of explained what is the difference between a quality assurance and a quality control in the very beginning, because a lot of people still use QA in place of QC. So that difference I have explained. And then I also explained why testing is important, why somebody should take the testing job very seriously, because there is a cost involved. There is cost to an extent is still okay, but suppose if you are testing, let's say, so when I say cost is, assume that you are being an assignment to work on some payment gateway application or a banking application or an insurance application. If some transaction goes wrong, that all will be result in the form of money, money loss, right? So to an extent, that itself is a big risk where a company can really get into troubles. But if you talk about some healthcare related products, and if you talk about today, most of the hospital systems are all automated. Then a lot of things that are coming in our day-to-day vehicle management systems, like automated cars and all. And recently we heard about the one of the plane crash thing. I don't know, like in India at least, I had that proper explanation of the WhatsApp reason. There was a WhatsApp forward explaining the reason what was the failure, but it is merely a software failure. Basically, it was it got restarted, and then they were unable to fix it in the time, and it was just flying down. So if you look at some of these things, and it was obviously costed some good 200 human lives. So if you look at some of these things, that's where exactly the value of the quality assurance and the testing comes into picture. So, I mean, to human life, I don't think we can assign any cost to it. So there's definitely, it's underestimated. And we cannot really, tie up a cost to that. So that's one of the things that always motivates, but also puts us in the responsibility that we are going to do a highly critical job. Anything that we are majorly we looked at like a quality gatekeeper. So ensure that anything that goes into production is definitely being validated and ensured with a proper quality. And there is a small difference of project and product. So something like very specific to a customer we call project, generic solutions we call like product. And then we started with the software development lifecycle, kind of explain how does a waterfall methodology works. So just for the people who just coming today, let me see if I can, yeah, this is the Excel sheet that we discussed. And we discussed all these phases. So majorly we talked about the QA team roles and responsibilities, what they're going to do in each phase of the life cycle. And basically, we also talked about the entry criteria and exit criteria from each phase of the life cycle. So this will be like a reference for you before you're going for an interview. You can look at it, what exactly initial phase, requirements phase, design phase, and when we will enter into requirements and when we will exit from requirements phase. So it's a very simple, handy, and kind of explaining all the roles and responsibilities. And also we talked about a bit of on the test planning activity, what happens during the design, but I'll discuss more in detail later. We are yet to discuss on all these things, like how to do a test design or a development, how to do an execution, how to do defect tracking, defect management. So we are yet to discuss on all that. Now coming to the agile methodology, the next one is the most important one, and what we are following today is the agile methodology. So I know by now some of you may be already working on it, be it a software industry, non-software industry, and some of you may be hearing it for the first time. So what is this methodology is like? Yeah, this is the right diagram that I want to use. But otherwise, we can simply say, for example, it's more like doing the things in iterations. So you start with a requirement, you do a design, coding, coding or development, testing or stabilization, then giving it for the user acceptance testing, and finally going for a maintenance, and then deployment into production, and then maintenance starts. So this is like one cycle completed. And that cycle timeline is what we're going to discuss. It typically will be maximum of 6 weeks is generally recommended for this whole cycle to get complete. Or we generally call this as an iteration to complete. Then what happens again, one more cycle or an iteration starts. Again, we'll go through all these phases. And again, we will complete all of these in 6 weeks of time. 6 weeks is a maximum recommended for a agile cycle, basically. So we call it as like an iteration. So one iteration cycle can be as minimum as 1 week. Actually, sometimes in one day. Morning you will start a requirement, do the design, do the coding, testing, give it for the users. They'll do user acceptance testing, and confirm it to production by evening. So it could be as low as a single day, and maximum that it should take is, generally we don't plan beyond is 6 weeks. So, but all the phases what we have discussed are still important, but we are going to do it in like shorter cycles, shorter timelines. And these shorter timelines is what we call it as like sprints or iterations. And typically like 6 weeks, 4 weeks. Most of the companies, what they are working today is of a 2 weeks model. A lot of companies are actually working in 2 week sprints, but some companies do work in weekly sprints, daily, and some companies do multiple times in a day also. Like very dynamic, very agile. Agile is basically the synonym is like a quick or a faster delivery. The reason because it's a big shift in the industry around 7, 8 years ago. Before that, it was majorly waterfall, but for the last 7, 8 years, most of the companies started following the agile, and there are different roles which I'm going to talk about, and some of the roles like Scrum Master, Product Owner, can also be looked at from the QA experience. Like once you achieve a good QA experience, and if you're interested towards becoming a Scrum Master or a Product Owner, you can even understand those roles better. So, but typically, like, what is the idea behind Agile and why we had to go is, again, the kind of dynamic expectations from the customer, and the timeline what they are looking. I mean, we can look at our day-to-day business lives, how they have changed. Previously, if you wanted to order something and get it to deliver to your home, it used to take a good 8 to 10 working days, right? And maybe sometimes even beyond that. And we want that to be delivered as ASAP, probably in the same day or maybe the next day, or maximum of 2 to 3 working days. So that's how the business customers are, looking at the systems, and things are getting changed. And if you look at most of these e-commerce systems, for example, if there is an upcoming sale coming up and you wanted to implement some good new features for your system, uh, though you may plan a well ahead, but there could be a lot of implement ideas and things like that can happen as we go ahead close to the season sale, and we may wanted to really take a quick decisions and then implement, and should be available to the customers immediately. So more like customer expectations, demand from the customers, and obviously otherwise you'll be losing the good market share in the competition. So all these things kind of drove us most of the companies to go and deliver. Otherwise, previously it used to be minimum, like minimum to minimum is a 3 months project, but I worked on the longest one is like close to 3 years of project as well. So it started somewhere in like 2007 and it went up to 2010. So it was that big projects as well. And things like Aadhaar card in India, people know, and similarly, most of the government projects that you have seen other countries also took good amount of time. But so looking at this, it's one is expectations from the customer and the industry, the business users kind of drove us to this model. And in this model, what we're going to do is whatever the features that you wanted to deliver, it could be the same set of 10 features that you wanted to deliver in a waterfall for 1 year of time or for 6 months of time. Sorry, 10 features which you wanted to deliver in like 6 months of time. But the idea behind the agile methodology is to identify those smaller features. We'll talk about them. In agile, it's slightly different. We call them like, this whole thing is like an epic. And then we will go create about a user story for each one of this. User story 1, user story 2. Like this, you will create 10 user stories. User stories is basically story of the user, how he wants to use the system, but there is a prescribed format, and I'll explain what is most important from a testing perspective that you have to look for. There is something called acceptance criteria, which will be clearly explaining us how the customers are going to accept this system. So that will be a straightforward input for our test cases. So we'll talk about some sample user stories as well. But typically the features, the whole project, requirement can be explained in the form of epic at a very high level, and then we are going to drill down them into, or modularize into user stories. And then to achieve this user story, we will go on creating tasks, detailed tasks, development tasks, design tasks, testing tasks, all those, and then we will estimate them properly, and then we'll work on to the closure in the 2 weeks of time. So what happens, like when we start with a user story, we'll create all the, there's something called sprint planning, which is going to happen. And then in that, we will break down it into tasks, and then we'll go work on the tasks, and we'll try to deliver it in the 2 weeks of time. So at the end of 2 weeks, the recommended is obviously you should identify a story which can go complete in 2 weeks and also goes to production. So out of these 10 user stories, obviously we'll talk to customer and prioritize. Customer might say, first I want user story 2, then I want user story 1, then I want user story 5. So we'll prioritize them, and according to the priority, we'll pick up those user stories. In some sprints, we might take more than one user story, depending on, I'll explain all that, like, depending on the team capacity. So typically a Scrum team will consisting of 7 to 9 people. This is the recommended ratio. It cannot be beyond that, or it cannot be really, but sometimes you may have like 5 people, 6 people, but it cannot be lower than that as well. So a good standard recommended Scrum team is like 7 to 9 people. And who are all they? Obviously, it is consisting of development team, QA team, support team, and there is some very important role called Scrum Master. So Scrum Master, development team, QA team, and support. So, but typical range is like 7 to 9 people. So the 7 to 9 people will pick up important user stories and try to deliver it in the 2 weeks. They should be, coming close to the end, and it should go into production as much as possible. But sometimes what happens, we cannot really complete the second user story fully in the sprint, and in the next sprint, just alone user story 3 is also won't be sufficient. So we will end up in a situation like, 2 sprints put together, we can deliver 3 user stories, and they're all related. They should go into production only at once. So in that case, what happens, we'll complete the 2 cycles, and then we will take it into production rather than just taking it at the end of first sprint itself. So it does still happen, but we have to minimize that, and we have to ensure at the end of the sprint. Of course, that is a job of the product owner. Here we have some roles: product owner and Scrum Masters together work and then ensure, identify the tasks which are the user stories which can go into production by end of the sprint. Okay, so work is going to be done in the form of iterations, and typical iteration timeline is like, 6 weeks, 4 weeks, etc. There is something like first we'll create whatever we wanted to deliver from this product. It all goes into something called product backlog. So who is going to create this? This will be majorly created by product owner. Product owner creates it in consultation with customers, customer or business people. So he will who will be the bridge between the technical team and the customer is that the product owner role. And previously in the waterfall, we looked at more like a business analyst, right? If you look into this, first thing that comes is like business analyst will prepare the BRS or BRD. So that is an initial phase, and that is going to be happen with something called a role called product owner. Then who can become a product owner? Anybody again priorly worked as a project manager, product manager, technical project manager. These are some of the roles. I mean, basically they are an SME on that particular domain, be it an e-commerce system or any banking or an insurance related system, who can really understand the business strategies, business terminologies, and come up with the backlog for the team to work on it. So product backlog will be created by product owner, who will be the bridge between the technical team and the business people. And what typically product backlog consists of? Product backlog consists of, as I say, like, it consists of epics. It consists of epics, user stories that needs to be delivered to the customer. So also he will be prioritizing those user stories. For example, if the customer has given some 10 user stories, which one to go first and which one to go second. So that priority also is going to be done by the product owner and business teams together decides user story 5 should go first, 7 should go next, 3 should go next, things like that. So any questions so far? I know it's going more like a one way. So I want to hear if there are any questions before I really go into more details. Okay, no questions. Cool. So we'll talk about what is an epic. Epic is at the very high level it's more like a BRS or BRD kind of thing talking about for the overall system level. But user stories is definitely something that we all should aware, QA should aware, because those are the direct inputs for you to write the test cases, user stories and use cases. So we'll talk about an example of an epic and a user story. Now, as I explained, the best team size can be like 7 to 9 people, consisting of Scrum Master, development, QA, and support. Who can become a Scrum Master is the one who will be controlling this whole Scrum team. He will be the lead for this whole Scrum team. Again, who can become a Scrum Master? I'll explain their roles and responsibilities also, but who can become Scrum Master is like anybody can become Scrum Master who have development experience, QA experience, support experience. And I have seen in the last good 7-8 years, major people converted into Scrum Master or from the QA or from the testing, for the reason that if there is a developer, he will be mostly working on couple of user stories or modules, and there is another developer who is working on it, like working on another user story or modules, like that. You're working on different user stories by different people. But when it comes to QA, mostly this person will have an end-to-end knowledge on this whole system, with respect to the integration, what is the dependencies of one system with the another system. So I've seen majorly people from testing background or like best suitable for the Scrum role, because he knows the other connectivity points, who are the dependent systems for this, and to whom we are providing the data, are basically who other systems are dependent on us. So it'll be more, QA is the one who will have an end-to-end knowledge on the system by testing it. So I saw most of them are converted into Scrum Masters, but nevertheless, even people from dev, you can expect to be a scrum master, or even sometimes a good support engineer who is supporting the system for a while, because he is the first one to face all the customer issues. And when there are issues from the customer, by troubleshooting or by fixing to an extent, he got an extensive knowledge on the whole system. So even scrum master can be done from a support side as well. So this is about the role. The role basically is to lead the Scrum team, and what kind of activities that they're going to do. So typically, let's look at this page and then we'll come back. So if you see here, there's a business team. We need to start from here. I'll just mark it. So right now we're talking about this. Can you all see the picture properly? Is it clear? Okay. So there is a business team, end users, and there's a business process, like what, for example, this is an insurance company, and how does the whole cycle in procuring the customers, or first registering, getting the customer registration, then completing the insurance process, and finally claiming, all those things, report generations, everything. There is a business process, let's assume. And there are customers and the stakeholder teams who are going to be working on this system. It could be from one business team, it could be from multiple business teams, and there could be some architectural teams as well, as from their side, to ensure technically the system is scalable for the future needs. And we are going to take an architecture which is available round the clock. So there are some technical architects or project management teams also from their side. So what they're going to do, they are going to come up with epics, user stories, or it could be simple in the form of business features, what they wanted to achieve from this system. And from the technical side, as I said, product owner is the one who will be regularly talking to the business team and understand what are their expectations, what are the new features that they are expecting. So it will be majorly documented at high level as an epic, and next level as a user story, and then third level like business features, and then gets into tasks, etc. So as he gets clarity from the business team, he will add it to something called product backlog. So there is, nowadays we have a lot of tools available, which can be centrally available to all the teams over the net. And your teams may be scattered across different geographic locations, but you will use application management life cycles like JIRA, or it can be Trello, or HP application management life cycles. So you will use some of these tools and you will create the product backlog. It's a simple template. It's not more like a document, big document. It's more like an epic template. They have to fill up all the required things, like what is a priority, what is the ask, who is asked, who is asking this, which business use, what is a priority, timeline, expectations timeline, and a bit of a detailed description about that. And obviously, almost all the templates will have attachments, so you can go and attach if there is a document, BRS or BRD previously that is written. If you have any diagrams, the way that they're expecting, any workflows, you can attach all of that, and you can create a product backlog. Product backlog, in the sense, is something that we wanted to, the teams, the technical teams wanted to work on that. Ideally, this is where it starts, and this is what they do, and this is what product owner comes into picture, and this is the product backlog. And then I talked about the sprint, which is like a 2 weeks of timeline, or like 4 weeks of timeline. From the product backlog, we get into something called a sprint. So we'll go to a sprint planning on the first day out of these 2 weeks. We'll go to the sprint planning. We'll spend a good amount of time. Like sometimes in a 4 weeks of sprint, one full day is also spent in planning itself. And in a 2 weeks of sprint, I've seen teams spending good 4 hours in planning, because the planning should be proper. Planning consisting of what are the features we are going to deliver by end of this sprint, what user stories we are going to deliver by this sprint, and clear expectations from every Scrum team member, what they are supposed to do, proper estimation of the task, how much time this will take. Is it like a 4 hours task or an 8 hours task? I'll also explain, there is a methodology called wideband Delphi method of estimation. We'll talk about that. Uh, it's one of the best way to estimate. So they'll go into more detail. So that's why Agile methodologist recommends it's okay to spend good 4 to 5 hours for the planning for a 2 weeks of a sprint rather than getting into troubles later, getting into troubles from the day two. So they will recommend a good sprint planning time. And in the sprint planning, I'll tell you what they're going to do more in detail as well. So basically the same thing which I've explained. They'll go to each user story, understand it very clearly, whether it is acceptance criteria is being done, documented, definition of done criteria is being mentioned, done criteria is being mentioned, what are the dependent systems. They'll read out each user story and estimate it. If you wanted to just understand a user story sample, let's look at. Let me just try to read this. Something, this is how, typically it looks like. There is a description. As a user, I should have an option to print any item with all the details, comments, and other things. I should get printable view in the browser and then should have option to print it in different formats. So this is basically talking about a print feature for your report or for any template that gets opened in your tool. And what is most important is there is something called acceptance criteria. And if you look at that acceptance criteria, it is saying all the item information should be visible, including the title, ID, description, comments, attachment names, linked items, tasks. So basically, again, this is more like explaining application lifecycle management. So there is a, let's assume you have an agile management tool, and in the agile management tool, suppose I opened Epic or I opened a user story or I opened a task and I wanted to print that. So all the items information should be available of all these things. And on the preview page, I should be able to select the different format like a PDF format, Word format, Excel format, or any XML format, or any other format that whatever the business people being asked for. All the item type should be like, printable, like user story, Epic. The print should be available for all these things. This is more like explaining agile user story with an example of agile management cycle. So user story, Epic, task, issue is basically a bug. So all these, we call them as like work items, or we call them like sprint items. All these should be able to print it. And in case of, okay, there is a very clear criteria. In case of an Epic, we will show the related user stories and show only ID, title, responsible, who is responsible, status, and priority. For all other things, we will not show, but in case of an Epic, this should happen. And it should be possible to print the item details from almost anywhere, like maybe from sprint board. We'll talk about all these things. Like, there is a sprint board for some leadership team to come and directly go to a board. Let's say we are in the end of the first week of the sprint, and if I'm a QA manager, I just want to come and see where is a current sprint status, how many tasks completed, how many tasks are still pending, how many tasks are still nobody has picked up in spite of five working days. I can see all those. I mean, generally that's not going to be the criteria. I'll tell you how we resolve that situation. But let's say somebody is on a emergency leave, and there is an item pending it and nobody's picked up that. So as a manager or a leadership team, we should be able to see all those things from, so basically from the boards, And in case of an epic or a user story, from the backlog, we should be able to print. Item detail view, we should be able to print, and from the pop-up under context one. So these are the different places from where I can, trigger a print for the agile tasks, or user stories or an epic. So this is how a user story experience. Like as a user, what I can do as a Scrum Master, as a normal Scrum member, when I log into application lifecycle management tool, it should go. This is more like one example, but let's go back and look at something more generic, which we all know. Sorry. There's one related to, yeah, I think probably this is the one. No, this is what we just discussed. We will definitely create in the Agile Management tool as well. Yeah, but otherwise, this is another one. Can you all see this? It's still loading. Let me see if it gets loaded. Okay, otherwise, what is this is basically, you can see it has something like US 9, that is user story 9, and it has a title called credit card payments. So typically in a payment gateway system, this story, I think this everybody should be familiar, because the previous one, unless you know the Scrum tools, you will not get a full picture of it. But if you see this one, yeah, I think now it's better. But if you see this, what it is talking about is credit card payments, and that is a story name. There is a story name there. Obviously, uh, every user story should have a unique name as much as possible. And then there is a value statement here. The value statement should contain, as a user, I should be able to make the payments through credit card in the e-commerce system. So that's going to be kind of a value statement. And what you see over little below is the acceptance criteria. Like, when we are going to accept this particular story implementation as correctly implemented or not correctly implemented based on this acceptance criteria. If all the items mentioned in this acceptance criteria are met, then we will say this story is implemented correctly. Otherwise, it's more like not implemented. Let me see if I can expand a bit. So now I think it's a little better. So you can see, as a user, as a purchaser on the website, I want the ability to pay with a credit card so that I may immediately confirm my purchase. So that is the kind of value statement from that user story. And the acceptance criteria says it should accept the it should accept the Discover, Visa, MasterCard, whatever the card types that are available, and what is in scope and what is out of scope. Basically, is clearly talking about that. And then there should be a validation of credit card number when authorized. Basically, when somebody is going to swipe it, there should be an authentication against that particular card, whether it's really a valid card or not. If somebody is using a expired card, or if somebody is using a incorrect credit card number being entered, so that kind of validation should happen. And then there is a validation of expiration date and the CVV, the unique number about the card. So that should happen in the system. And then we have to validate the billing address, the name. I don't think a credit card will have a billing address, but the name on the credit card should match with the name of the purchaser who is trying to make. But again, there are a lot of people who will not really restrict on this, because as long as if we get the correct credit card number, correct expiry date, and the one-time output, the OTP that gets generated if you are able to, the security pin that you are able to generate. So mostly they'll authenticate and do it. Name matching, I've not seen much of them restricting it out of it. And then there is a generation of the success and failure messages after processing. So if expiry date is incorrect, what message you want to display? If CVV number is incorrect, what you want to display? If card number is incorrect, so all that should be properly displayed. And then there is very important thing called definition of done. When can you say that this user story is properly completed? So the definition of criteria says if it passes through all the regression tests. What is regression test? So for every user story, we are going to come up with a unique test cases, the test cases to test that, in this case, credit card payments. So we definitely the QA team will come up with the test cases for that. But along with this, if we already have other payment options, for example, through wallets or through debit card or through net banking, we need to ensure they are not impacted with the implementation of this feature, and that is called regression testing. So all the regression testing cases pass and is passes through the testing of the acceptance criteria. After the QA team completes the testing, the business team also performs the testing, and we call that as an acceptance testing. So business team also should test and confirm, and approved by the UI team. So there is a UX team or a UI team. So in the beginning, they will provide the different UX designs, how the screen should look like. It should be consistent with all other pages that we have it in the e-commerce system already. If you take most of the popular e-commerce sites, you will know most of the screens are consistent, and they'll follow certain pattern. And if you're adding a new feature, it should not be looking like a very different screen from all the existing screens. So it should look like, and all the buttons and the helping buttons, everything should be matching to already existing one. So for that, there is a separate UX team will be there and able to show feature in the company demo. So at the end of the sprint, like in these 2 weeks, what is going to happen, I'll explain. After the tasks gets implemented, QA completes the testing. After all the tasks are completed, then we should go and demo it to the clients. Basically, in the whoever is a leadership team will take a decision whether this feature should go into production or not go into production. We should demo it, and then we'll get a go no go kind of confirmation to put it into production. So once we get a confirmation as go, then the feature will be deployed into production and will be available to all the millions of customers who are going to use it. So that is what is a value statement. A value statement value statement followed by acceptance criteria followed by definition of done. And you can see there is an attachment section where you can attach nearly anything. It could be a Word doc, could be an Excel, could be a CSV file, or it could be a PDF file, or it can be a wireframe, screenshots, anything that you can attach in the attachment section. And then there is a owner who is going to work on this user story. So there will be an owner name. Initially, it starts with product owner name, but as it gets assigned to Scrum team, for one product, there can be multiple Scrum teams also. And for each Scrum team, there will be a Scrum Master. So initially, it will be on the product owner name, then goes to the respective Scrum team, Scrum Master, and that Scrum Master will assign to the respective developer or QA or support engineer in the sprint planning day. And then there is something called state, whether it's like, defined state, work in progress state, or done state. So there will be a state, and followed by there is an this is more like unscheduled. So this is an iteration, which iteration or which sprint we are planning to do till it's not defined. So once we go into sprint planning based on the estimates coming up, as I told you, in one sprint you may do 2 user stories, or 2 sprints together we can do 3 user stories. So we'll have to decide by which by which sprint we can deliver this. And then there is a plan of an estimation. How do we estimate it in sprint planning? Let's assume some user stories we got it like this, and we have to let's assume we are doing a sprint planning today. So there is something called a user story number people will generally assign, and that number will be in the form of a Fibonacci series. Basically, it will be like 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and beyond 13, it's like 13 plus 8, 21. We don't want to really take up any user story whose point is beyond 20. So anything going beyond 13, something, the next one is obviously 21. What team wants to do is they will see if we can split this into further smaller user stories, because 21 is like a very complex number. Okay, first of all, what is this I'm explaining? Every user story can have something called user story points or user story estimate. And that number will be in this series, like a Fibonacci series 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and 13. And what is this represents? It represents the complexity of this user story. That means if anything like 2, 3, 5, this is merely resembles like it's a small user story, and we can just finish it in maybe 2 to 3 working days, depending on the estimates comes up. Or this is more like a medium user story, and this is more like I would say a large user story, and anything going beyond 20 you can consider like an extra large. And we don't want to take up an extra large as it is. We wanted to split into see if we can create 2 more user stories out of it, and take it in 2 different sprints rather than trying to fit this into one sprint. So that kind of activities will happen. Who will give this number? Again, the product owner and scrum master can decide based on their understanding what will be the best user story point. But sometimes in the sprint planning, scrum master will ask you, all the people, what do you think about this user story? Do you think it's like, or he'll ask you like everybody in the scrum team, all the 7 people or 8 people, what do you think is a user story point for this? Somebody will say, I think this is 5 based on my understanding, because there are endpoints that we have to take care of it, and there are dependency systems that we have to take care. But this seems to be still a small one, so I think it cannot be beyond 5. Someone says, no, this cannot be 5. It's not that simple. Probably, I will put more context into it, and these are all the scenarios also we have to take care. And otherwise, any failure will result in the overall system. So I think this is definitely 13, he will say. And somebody will say, I don't think it's 13. Based on my understanding and experience in the system, it can be an 8. So it's more like a different estimate. It's not an estimate, a point number coming from each Scrum team member. And then we will, after discussion, we'll park it in the right way. This is like as 5, or this is an 8, or this is a 13. So any questions on this number? So you can see here, this right now it's an 8. Any questions on what is this user story point? And there is, like I told you, there is a methodology called wideband Delphi estimation methodology. For example, someone says, no, this is a very simple one, it's 2. And someone says, no, this is like 13. Like two extremes. Somebody saying too simple and somebody saying too large. That means definitely there is some, and then somebody saying, of course, 5 or 8. Okay, there is one person saying 5, and there is generally it won't be this scattered. Like somebody thinking too simple, somebody thinking too, but still, let's assume there are 4 different people are giving 4 different numbers. So as a scrum master, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up these 2 people who told the lowest number and who told the highest number. Then I want to hear from them, like, why do you think it is too complex? Why do you think it's 13? Can you please, provide more details if there are any scenarios that we are missing? And let's assume this person is there in the system for a long time, and he knows all the connectivity points, why we should really take this as a critical. And he's go on explaining all the different components that will be touched upon and the impact for the regression testing. And based on his experience, is speaking out and saying it's too critical. And probably this person is like very just like 3 months into the system, and he could get something tested recently, or developed recently. So probably he may not really think of all the scenarios when he's giving the point. That's why he said two. But now he's changing his mind after listening to this person, because he's kind of explained all the dependent systems, and then he immediately say, oh, I understand why it's critical. So definitely it cannot be two. So it can be, even I'll agree that it can be 8 or 13. And then this fifth person who told five, now he's also saying, yeah, even I hear both of them. So it's definitely cannot be that simple. We do have to take care of these many components. So even I'll say this is 8. And now it's a between of an 8 and 13. And again, if we do a little more dive deep, then we will be able to arrive at what exactly 8 or 13. And then we'll communicate to the business owners, product owner, saying, "Hey, this is a very critical user story, which is like 13 user story points, and it can spill over into multiple sprints, or one full sprint, we can only take this one." So that's how we are going to communicate back. So is this clear how the user story point will be arrived or decided? Team, make it interactive. I'm not getting any questions, and even simple yes no will help if you understood or not understood. So this is more also called like a relative points. And based on this number, team will be able to decide on the hours, how many hours it will take. Is it going to take like 10 hours, 5 hours, or like, full 100 hours that we have? So that will be decided how many hours it's going to take. So this is an example of a user story. And for the QA, what is most important is this acceptance criteria and this definition of done. Of course, the definition of done will be more important for a Scrum Master and a product owner. But for a QA, this is most important. Acceptance criteria is the most, because based on this only you're going to arrive test cases. You're going to write your test cases and test scenarios. For example, to test the acceptance of different type of cards, you'll have different test cases. To ensure the validation of the credit card number, so you'll have different test cases. So this is most important from a QA point of view. Okay, let's go back to here. So that's how we'll pick up some product backlog, and then we'll pick up some user stories, spend good 4 hours in the sprint planning, and arrive at certain important things like this relative point, estimation for the story. And then we'll also talk about like whether we can take up only one user story out of the discussion. After the discussion, we'll arrive at and say we can only pick up one user story in this sprint. So Scrum Master will go and communicate back to product owner. We have done with the sprint planning today, and we should be able to pick up like user story 5, which is like 13 user story point, critical one, and we can only deliver that. And then we will go and start, in the same sprint planning, we'll also create detailed tasks. Who's going to do what development team is going to do, what QA team is going to do. We'll also create the detailed tasks, and we'll estimate those tasks also, how many hours that will take. Like we should arrive at a task in such a way that which cannot go beyond one day. For example, if a QA is there and is going to create a task for testing of, let's say, validation of the card types, or validation of the credit card number, CVV, etc. Any test cases that will arrive, it could be some 30 test cases or 40 test cases. It should pick up the task in such a way that the task will be generally completed in the same day, because we are talking about a 2 weeks of time, and we need to create the tasks in such a way that a task can be completed in the same day that you pick up. If you pick up in the morning, you should be able to complete by evening. So that's the granular level we should go for it. So that's how we'll arrive at the tasks also in the sprint planning. And then what happens, since it's only a 2 weeks of time, like starting from the Monday, and first week, and then by next week. So it's only 10 working days. We don't have that luxury like previously in waterfall, 3 months project, 6 months project. We used to meet once in a week for the project status meeting. And it used to be like a good 1 hour meeting. People talk about where are we on the project. Of course, project manager will drive where are we on the project, and talk about dev status, QA status, operations team status, and all that. And if there are any action items, we used to take it and go back and start working on it. But this project, this sprint itself is 2 weeks, so you cannot really meet once in a week, because if something is not on the track, the Scrum Master cannot fix it in the next week because 1 week is already gone. So what happens in sprint planning is we'll meet every day. We'll meet every single day. But then again, you might have a question like, if you are meeting every day, when are we going to really work? We'll meet every day, but it's only for a quick and maximum of 15 minutes, not beyond this. We generally don't spend time more than beyond this. This is the recommended time for the team of 7 to 9 people. And very interestingly, this is called stand-up meeting. That means you don't even sit and relax explaining your status. It's more like a scrum meeting. People call it like a stand-up meeting. All the team members will be stand and they will answer 3 questions. Only 3 questions that they have to answer. They should not get into like explaining long story of things. Scrum Master is going to control this meeting if somebody is really dragging it more than. So when I say 15 minutes for 7 to 9 people, hardly everybody will get like 1.5 minute. And if in that 1.5 minute you need to answer 3 important questions. First question: what did you work on yesterday? Which task that you picked up yesterday and completed, or is it in progress? What is that? You have to explain what did you do yesterday. Third question: what are you planning to do today? What is the task that you're planning to work today? And third important thing is there any roadblock? I mean, is there any anybody got unable to proceed because of some issue? So if there is any roadblock for anybody, be it a dev or a QA or operations team, the Scrum Master will talk to him offline after this meeting and try to unblock him. For example, he is dependent with the cloud machine, which is supposed to get, you know, uh, it's kind of not accessible at this moment. So he's trying to talk to the teams and trying to get it available. So see if Scrum Master can speed up that process by unblocking him, or he is waiting for a build. Let's say he's a QA guy blocked, waiting for the build from the development team. Then the Scrum Master will go talk to the corresponding developers and understand better when this will be available. And meanwhile, if the QA can pick up any other task, so that kind of activity is Scrum. So Scrum, one important point about Scrum Master, he is just not a lead or is just not a manager. He's an independent contributor. He will also have some tasks to complete, and he will also lead this particular team. So in a way, 50% of his time or more than 50% of the time will be on the tasks as well, and also he will be working on taking care of this team as well. So it's a critical role. Do not assume Scrum Master is only like a lead or a manager role, or a project manager kind of role. No, he is also. It could be from QA, it could be from dev, as I explained. He's also a contributor, and he's also going to take care of this. So this is how 2 weeks will go, and every single day they'll come and talk about the status. And towards the end of the sprint, as I said, like they will go do a demo to the client, how, whatever the features that they have implemented. And before they start on the next sprint, they'll also do something called retrospective. So you can see over here, there is something called retrospective to look at like, what went well in this sprint, what are the things that we did really good, and what things did not go well, and how can we improve them in the next sprint. So this is very important from a team's retrospective perspective to do better in the next sprints. So this is what typically this agile methodology Scrum process is going to happen. And this circle is more like one sprint, and then again there will be another sprint, and there will be another sprint. At any time for the leads and managers to come and see how this team is performing, most of the agile tools will have a dashboard. From that I can get the status of the sprint, how many tasks completed, how many are pending, how many are like still not touched. And there is a very important progress chart that people look at is called burn down chart. How these tasks are getting burned on a day-to-day basis. For example, at the beginning of the sprint, there are 15 tasks totally. There are 5 for dev, 5 for QA, and 5 for operations team. By end of first 2 days, I can see that like the graph should go like this. We'll start with 15 tasks. And here is the end of the sprint. Let's say it's 30th of April. So we started the sprint on, let's say, 15th with 15 tasks. By 17th, 2 are completed, and 19th, 40% completed, and something like 22nd, 60% completed, and by 30th, all tasks are completed. So it should be like this. It should not be like this. So that indicates that somebody is not really completing the tasks on time. So it should be a proper burn down chart should look like this, where tasks are picked up and completing on time without any issues. Okay, so this is typically what an agile methodology works. So what we'll do tomorrow is like we'll look at more examples on user story, and possibly trying to understand from a QA perspective. I think whatever I've explained, I've just put it over here, all that. Detailed task list, stand-up meeting, acceptance criteria. And typically, if it is a 4 weeks of a sprint, I'll even talk about what QA will be doing in the first week, second week, third week, fourth week, etc. And then we'll see if there are any questions. All right, so any questions from the discussion that we had? Definitely, Omar. Like I'll send the document. If you're a member, you can just drop us an email. Uh, and but otherwise, there should be a broadcasting email should go to all the people who are attending as well. Whom will send out the doc. Yeah. Cool. Any questions other than the logistics? There's a question like, what sort of interview questions should we expect from user stories? Yeah, one question that people generally ask is like, as a QA, what is that your role in with respect to user stories? So one is reviewing the user story. So first of all, if there is a user story created by your Scrum Master, you will read and you'll understand and you will review. If there is anything that is not clear, not in consistent, you'll raise questions, ask questions before you pick up the task from that sprint. That means by the time a sprint starts, all the user stories in that sprint should be very clear to all the team members, dev, QA, everybody. Basically read, understand, clarify questions, and ensure, the most importantly, acceptance criteria is there, because that's important for the QA. Definition of done is there. So those are some of the things that you should look from the user story. If anything is not clear, then obviously you don't know what to test and how to test. So that's what you should look for it. All right. Cool. Then so okay, there's one more question. What does the first course entail? Like, I'm pretty new to software testing, so what should I start? Don't live in India, so how can I benefit from the practicals? How long is a manual testing training? So manual testing training should take a good 12 sessions, 12 to 15 sessions max, including the practical tools and everything. Putting of these, whatever I'm talking about, we should see it in the tool as well. Something like a JIRA or something like Agile Management tool. Ibrahim, to answer your question, okay, so when it comes to software industry, again, development obviously requires an extensive programming experience. But I don't want to discount and say QA is the one to go and pick it up. In QA also we have two parts, manual testing and automation testing. Manual testing is something where you need the domain knowledge, but not a programming or working development experience. But if you're good in your domain, then probably you may be doing a better job than a technical person. So I can say manual testing is something that you can start look up to, but eventually only manual testing won't help you for a long career. So you need to slowly start learning programming, automation as well to have a long career in that. All right, let's take questions offline. If there is anything more, just drop us in an email, and then or tomorrow you can put in the chat as more relevant. I'll take them up. Let's go with this for today and talk to you tomorrow. Thanks, team.